As Senator Santorum has shared, he would like to take most of his time on the Q&A, so I would like to ask people, we'll have microphones on each side of the aisle. Step over when you have a question, wait patiently. But I have a few questions submitted by our sponsors that I will ask him first, so you can start thinking and moving to the aisles if you have questions. The first question is from AARP. What would you do to address Social Security's financial shortfall and reform the program to put it on stable ground for future generations?
Thank you. I've actually been one of the few folks over the years that have actually tried to address this issue. Back in 2004 and 5, after the presidential election, President Bush talked about trying to do something on Social Security. And you may recall Jim DeMint, who's a senator, now runs Heritage Foundation. We actually put forth formal debates. It was myself and Jim, we were the only two that were willing to do it on the Republican side. And then Ron Wyden and Dick Durbin, both of whom were still in the United States Senate. And we debated Social Security and how to reform that system and talked about different ideas to try to start the discussion in a way that really focused on policy instead of get away from sort of the gotcha politics of Social Security, which can be pretty nasty. Here's the bottom part. Social Security is the hardest program to reform. Not because it's actually hard to do from a standpoint of policy. It's actually pretty easy to do. But it's hard to do because it's a simple program and any change you feel. And so I use this example. The problem with Social Security is over the next few years, benefit levels are going to be here and revenue levels are going to be here. And by the year, I don't know, depending on who you believe, late 2020s to early 2030s, we're going to be at where the Social Security Trust Fund, which you can argue whether it really exists or not, but it does in legal fiction, in my opinion. But it does, it's there, and it runs out of money, and it runs out of bonds to redeem, and we'll only be able to pay 77 cents on the dollar of benefits. That's according to Social Security actuaries. So under the law, we will only be able to pay beneficiaries at that point 77 cents on the dollar. So of course, we have to do something about that. The question is, what do you do? How do you preserve and save the system? So, you have two options. You can either bring benefits down or you can bring taxes up. How many are for raising Social Security taxes? Raise your hand. Okay. How many are for cutting Social Security benefits? Raise your hand. That's why we can't fix Social Security. Because nobody wants to do either. Nobody wants to cut benefits, nobody wants to, but the system isn't solvent, the system doesn't work. So that's why you never see anybody out there running on Social Security reform, because nobody's for whatever anybody suggests, because nobody wants to do anything. And the reason you can do this at Medicare, you can propose all sorts of things. People don't understand how the Medicare system works, they don't understand it's very complex, they don't know how it affects them. But if you're talking about raising your taxes or cutting your benefits, it's pretty easy to figure out how it affects you. And that's why Social Security is so hard. And so, here's what I've said. I think a starting point has to be this. Social Security, when it was implemented in 1936, anybody know what the life expectancy was in 1936?
62 years.
61. 61 was the life expectancy in 1936. Do you know what it is today? 78 to 80. Okay, it depends on who you really believe, but about 78. So, what's the eligibility age for Social Security? Has it changed? Yes, by about a year, a little over a year. And that's just recently. And so, instead of people, on average, not living very long on Social Security, people are living a long period of time. That's why the system is in trouble. It's a good problem to have. Seniors are living longer. People are living longer. And the system wasn't built for that. And we have a demographic problem. We have the baby boomers hitting retirement, and we have the baby bust. Baby boomers didn't have a lot of kids. And so as a result, there's not the workforce there to support Social Security. So what's the answer to that? I term it generational equity. And that is, tie the Social Security eligibility age to the increase in life expectancy. So as life expectancy goes up, and it goes up about 1 month every 2 years on average. So as life expectancy goes up, the eligibility age goes up. Now, why is that fair? Well, every generation going forward will have the same amount of time as a generation on Social Security, right? And assuming, which we have, it's not assuming, the fact is we can't afford the current system, at least make the system going forward fair to every generation as a whole. Now you say, well, that's going to move the retirement eligibility age back. Yes, but you're going to be living longer. So your time on Social Security as a generation is going to stay the same. So one generation isn't paying more for the next generation, and so on. So that actually will do a fair amount to solve the problem. There are other things that we need to do in dealing with this problem, but I think that's a starting point. And I don't know how you feel. How many people think that that's unfair? Raise your hand if you think it's unfair to do that, to have generational equity. You know, here's one of the problems with Social Security too. Politicians won't talk about it. I think we can come to a solution on Social Security, but you have to have a president who's willing to actually go out and have a national discussion and do what I just did. Sort of, here are the facts, folks. Now here's what we need to, you know, can we come? The problem is, the other side will say, oh, he wants to cut your benefits and he's throwing grandma off a cliff. That's the problem. And I'm going to try to get past that because I think Social Security is way too important not to try to do something to put it in good shape for the future.
Thank you. This question is brought to you by Des Moines Area Community College. Nationally, 32% of U.S. employers indicate they have difficulty finding skilled employees, with as many as 3 million open positions at any one time. The greatest need is middle skill workers requiring more than a high school diploma, but no more than a 1 to 2 year community college degree or credential. What would you do in the first 100 days as president to address the national middle skills workforce shortage? And how would you incent and support more individuals entering into training for good jobs that are open?
I think the biggest problem that I've found, I've visited probably 30 manufacturing facilities in the state of Iowa in the last year. I just said, visited one yesterday, and every single one of them tells me the same thing. They can't find good people. Their biggest problem is finding competent people to come in. People who just want to work, number one, willing and open to be trained, can pass a drug test. I mean, I hate to tell you, I mean, these are sort of the basic soft skills that, and he said, but the ability, because of their relationship, in this case, you know, was with Iowa Western, but whether it's DMAC or whether it's Kirkwood or whatever, there are lots of places out there. The problem is that we have this attitude with the elites in our culture, including, in my opinion, like the president, who sort of talks down this type of work and doesn't talk about the importance. And that's why I come back to, that's why I started with manufacturing. If you have a president of the United States that says America can get back on top again, we can be the #1 manufacturer in the world, it's a way to help reduce our CO2 emissions globally. It's a way to put Americans who are struggling right now back to work. And we talk about the importance of making things here. We show by visiting, as I do. You go to the workplace, most people have a perception of what a manufacturing plant looks like. It's like, you know, people walk out of there with dirt all over their face and their fingers are marled and, you know, have oil and grease. No, people go to work in polo shirts and they work and they program computers and you can eat off most of the floors in some of these manufacturing facilities. A lot of clean manufacturing that goes on. Manufacturing is high tech, is the way of the future. It is, as many people say, it's a combination of using your head and your hands. And that's actually much more rewarding than it is sitting behind a desk all day long. And so having a presence out there talking about it's part of the American obligation, if you will, to get our economy going, is to get young people, you know, I hate to say it, not necessarily to go to college, not necessarily to go to Penn State or Iowa State or whatever else, and get $200,000 in loans or whatever it is going to be, particularly if you're an out-of-state student, and go to a community college and get a training program, and maybe, you know, you can still take classes that are in addition to the training programs, your basic skill, your basic liberal arts curriculum to get a more well-rounded education. But get into those training programs, go to work, go to school part-time. In most cases, the employer is going to help pay for that education, and you have a change in attitude. I think more than anything else, any federal program, a change in attitude about what is a good job in America and what the role of colleges and universities is going forward in America, given the incredibly high price of a 4-year education right now and the value, the really questionable value for a lot of kids, particularly for some of the educational degrees that are coming out. I think a president who focuses on that can be a game changer for our economy.
Thank you. And our final sponsor question is brought to you by Microsoft. Current discussions underway in Congress about updating outdated laws include the issue of how law enforcement can access emails, photos, and other communications stored in the cloud. What is your view of updating laws to keep up with today's technology while ensuring the balance between privacy and national security?
As you know, we just had this argument earlier this year or last year on the Patriot Act and the reauthorization of the Patriot Act, and how much access we're going to give our intelligence community to data. And I took the opinion that the existing Patriot Act was perfectly fine. What we were giving access to was something called metadata. In other words, you can find out not the substance of the phone call, but who's being called and how long the call. That's metadata. That's data about the call. I think it's important that we have access to information of people who are trying to potentially harm the country, because we are, right now, our country is under attack. Right now, I guarantee you somewhere in America, probably not just somewhere, many places in America, we are under a cyber attack. From China, I guarantee it. China, Russia, a whole host of other places are trying to hack in. There it is, see? Okay, if I could speak Chinese, I would right now, but I'm not. So they can understand. Okay, so the bottom line is they are attacking us, and we are not at all prepared. The private sector isn't prepared. They have no idea what they're doing. You don't know about a lot of these attacks because the private companies don't want to tell you, because they don't want to, unless there has been some actual understanding of data has been leaked and it's out there, they're not going to tell you. And it's a very, very dangerous situation for our country, and it's not just the government. It's our communication networks, it can be our power networks, and we have to be able to have the technology to be able to find out what the bad guys are doing. And so it's a balancing act on privacy, but it is important for us to know how serious these attacks are and how we have to have the capability to be able to track them down and ferret them out and stop them if we can.
We'll now open up to questions from the audience. I would like to remind the media that we would like the audience questions to be first, and then media can follow after that. Or if we run out of time, you can maybe catch it in the hallway. I know there were some dialogues before we started as well. So, Andrea?
As Jay mentioned, civility is important in Iowa. What would you do in this campaign to improve civil discourse?
Well, I think I've actually been a pretty good role model on this front. I was asked the question during the debate about Donald Trump, and I basically said I'm not going there. I'm not going to get into this food fight. I've not been critical of him on a personal basis. I've said that the only person that benefits when Republicans attack each other's character or attack each other personally is Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, whoever might be the Democratic nominee. We need to stick to the policies and to the issues. There are plenty of issue differences between me and other candidates, and I will talk about those. So if I differ from Ted Cruz on immigration, which I do, and he wants to double the number of illegal immigrants in this country, I don't. I'll say that, and we'll have a discussion about that. But I'm not going to say, well, Ted Cruz is not, he's against American workers and he's, hates I mean, it's just ridiculous. He has a legitimate opinion as to what he thinks is good for America, and he has policies that he supports that does that. I respect them. I don't necessarily agree with him, but I respect him on that. And that's what we get into this environment that Barack Obama has created in Washington, this toxicity of personal attacks, of ascribing certain intentions behind people's actions. Well, if you want to cut this program, you want people to starve. You hate poor people. Or you don't like old people. Really, that's just counterproductive. And what has happened as a result of these singling out people on the other side, even people within his own party who disagree with him, and flaying them out there, has created a dysfunctional place. Yeah, I know this is going to come to a shock to many of you, But politicians are people too. I know that's a shocker here. I know it's a revelation to some. But they don't like to be criticized. And when you're out there and you have someone who's personally attacking you, who questions your integrity, questions your intentions, and is critical of you at a personal level, it makes it very hard to sit across the table and in good faith negotiate with them if you know they're going to go out there and twist and hammer you for everything you're trying to fight for. That's why nothing has been done. Nothing has been done in Washington, because there's no trust. And so I've made a pledge from the very beginning of this campaign. I'm not going there within the Republican Party. I'm not going there outside. I will hit people, and I will hit them hard if necessary on issues that I disagree with. But we're going to stop. We're going to stop with the personal attacks.
I like what you had to say earlier about moving jobs local to reduce CO2 emissions and finding ways to increase the skilled worker level. To further reduce the CO2 emissions, what's your plan for incentivizing renewable energy, solar panels, wind turbines, battery technology, and reducing or eliminating subsidies on fossil fuels?
Well, I will agree with you that I'm going to eliminate subsidies on fossil fuels, but I'm also going to eliminate subsidies on renewable fuels, because I don't think the government should be in the business of subsidizing any particular industry. And the proposal I'm going to be putting forward probably next week will eliminate all corporate subsidies, all of them. We will go to a 20% tax rate, a corporate tax rate. We will allow for full expensing of everything, including capital and equipment. And we will allow the marketplace to drive where that money is invested and what is competitive. I think that's the best thing to do for the economy. It makes us the most competitive. And as I said before, if we want to, we will have a much more dramatic impact on CO2 emissions if we are successful in growing the economy of this country, particularly in the area of manufacturing. We produce our energy cleaner, and we produce products cleaner than virtually any other country in the world. Maybe Europe does as good a job, but we certainly do it far better than we're not losing a lot of production to Europe right now. We're losing production to Mexico, India, China, Malaysia, Indonesia, all of which have little to no environmental controls. And so the idea of trying to get the government to pick winners and losers and try to say we're going to help this particular is in the long term not an effective strategy. The most effective strategy is to have good, sound environmental policy and bring many of those jobs back. Then you have a compound benefit of improving the environment and improving the economy of the country.
As president, what would you do to ensure that every child has access to high-quality early learning opportunities?
Yeah, here's what I would say. That the biggest problem for America today when it comes to education, and I think most of the studies have tracked this out, is not more government intervention into the lives of children and providing them services, whatever services they are. I always talk about two books. One written by a guy named Charles Murray, who's a libertarian, who wrote a book called Coming Apart a few years ago. And a guy wrote a book just a few months ago named Robert Putnam, who's a liberal Harvard sociologist. And they come to the same conclusion. Libertarian, liberal, same conclusion. That the principal problem affecting young people and their ability to rise and be successful is the breakdown of the American family. Is the fact that mothers and fathers are not there to nurture and support their children. And what you're suggesting, noble as it is more an attempt to fix the Band-Aid that's the problem in the first place, which is we have to intervene because parents aren't there to provide it. Putnam says this in his book. He says, it's more important for the long-term economic health of children in America. It's more important for parents to read to their children in their first 4 years of life than it is for them to pay for 4 years of college education. That's just the reality of how profound it is for parents to be engaged and involved in nurturing and supporting their children and giving them a healthy environment in which they are encouraged to learn and have encouraged curiosity in learning. We can try to do what you said, which is bring government in and replace that, but it won't work. It never works. It's not as good as mom and dad being there to do it. And we have government policies that, as well-meaning as they are, that really do destroy the family. I use an example of this all the time, and I run across this in the manufacturing sector. When people come in and say, well, you know, I really don't have to work, and you know, I'd lose more benefits if I actually did work. We have a lot of government programs that discourage people from working. And we have a lot of government programs that discourage families to form. You know, for the first time in the history of our country, a majority of children born out of wedlock, in America are born to homes where the father is still living in the home. Now, you would say, well, why is the father living in the home and not married to the mother? Well, do the math. And the math is simple. Dad doesn't marry mom. Mom's not working. Mom has a child. What's mom eligible for? A whole series of benefits. And they take advantage of those benefits. And dad can work, make money, do whatever they can, live in the house, file a separate tax return. They're economically much better off. We penalize marriage in this country. We penalize people for marriage. And so we have policies that cause families not to form. And this is, like I said, the first time. And plus, we have other policies that say marriage isn't about children anymore. Marriage is about two adults. It has nothing to do with kids. Well, if you send a message that marriage isn't about children, if you have policies that say you're better off not getting married, then what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is what's happening. We have the highest out-of-wedlock birth rate in the history of our country. In poor communities, it's the worst. Here's what Putnam said. If you were a single parent, a child being raised in a single parent home, in a neighborhood of single parents, and you go to the school in the single parent home school, the chances of you ever succeeding in America to reach the top 20%, not top 10%, not top 1%, but just to reach the top 20% of income earners in America is 3%. Now, I don't know about you, that is absolutely unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. And here's what else he said. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. The percentages are the same whether you're black, Hispanic, or white. So all of this talk about, oh, race is the issue, and it's not. You go into the minority communities, and what do you find? You find much higher percentages of children being born out of wedlock. You see more neighborhoods where there are no dads. And that's the problem. And we could go and talk about all of these well-intentioned things to fix this basic problem. We can talk about the police. We can talk about education. We can talk about early child. We can talk about all these things. You talk to any teacher, they'll tell you the same thing, which is you give me a kid who comes from a family that encourages learning and nurtures and supports the education of that child. And that child's going to do well in my school. If you come from a home that doesn't, guess what? It's going to be a problem. Not always, but most of the time. And that's the experience I've gotten from teacher after teacher after teacher telling me this. And so we can go around and say we can try to pass more government programs that try to help repair the family, or we can actually try to do something about repairing the family. You say, well, what can we do? Well, I mentioned welfare laws. They can be changed. But it goes back to the thing I was saying before about manufacturing. Actually having a president, instead of spending his time talking about global warming all the time, spend his time talking about how important the American family is, talking about the importance of marriage and families, and share with the American public these truths. Bring Robert Putnam, a liberal, in front of the American public. Bring all this. There is no argument anymore that this is the problem. There's a group called, John Podesta runs, it's called, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a liberal advocacy group. And they were interviewed after the Putnam study came out, and they said, well, I guess it looks like we're going to have to start using the F word, family. So liberals are now getting it. This is not a partisan issue anymore. This is not a liberal conservative issue anymore. This is just the truth. And you're probably hearing this for the first time because we have every politician in America is afraid to tell the truth because, oh, you'll be pointed out as you're moralizing. You're trying to impose your values. Stop the baloney. This is fact. This is what's happening. And if you're not willing to fight for our children, if you're not willing to give them a chance, I encourage you. I don't usually encourage liberal Harvard professors' books. Read the book Our Kids. If you haven't read that book, read it. And if you can just read the first 10 chapters of that book, you have to read the whole thing. Read the first 10 chapters and hear about what's going on in American neighborhoods today. And if you can read that book and say, oh, you know, we don't know anything about the family, fine. But you won't be able to do that. You will be as outraged as I am, and you will be hopefully demanding our people in public life to do something about the family instead of doing something about the government helping the family.
I have two questions. The first question is, Alzheimer's affects a lot of families at different ages and stages. My grandma died over 14 years ago, and she lived in a nursing home, and it broke our hearts. And as president, how would you take on the role as Alzheimer's in America? And second question, how would you secure our borders?
Okay, that's an interesting contrast right there. Look, I'm also personally affected. My father-in-law just passed away a couple of years ago from Alzheimer's. He struggled with it for 14 years. And it was obviously a very difficult experience for the family. Alzheimer's and dementia with the ever-increasing elderly population. This is going to become bigger and bigger problem, and one that's going to put more and more strain on families, as well as caregiving and the healthcare system. You know, one of the things that I've always been an advocate for, I know this might come as a surprise to some of you, but I was a huge advocate for AIDS research and doing more to try to combat AIDS, and was one of the leaders, in fact, led the charge from President Bush in the Senate in doing global AIDS response. When you have a pandemic like AIDS, or you have a chronic problem like Alzheimer's, which is going to explode and consume lots of families and lots of healthcare dollars, the government has an obligation from a public health perspective to focus a lot more time and energy on what we can do to try to counteract that. And so I would definitely focus more resources. Two ailments that I think should deserve a lot more resources at NIH are diabetes and Alzheimer's. Those are the two that seem to be the ones that are on the rise and consuming a lot more. And frankly, we still don't know a whole lot, given the knowledge we have on a lot of other diseases. We still don't know a whole lot about how to counteract these diseases, and I think that would be an area of emphasis for mine. On the border, the answer is, I think most Republican candidates are pretty solid on trying to do something about securing the southern border. I think there's a lot of difference between Republicans. I introduced a bill 12 years ago, which was just simply a border security bill, because I felt like if we could secure the border, then you can deal with all these other issues once. I always say it's easier to deal with a finite problem than an infinite problem. And unless you secure the border, the issue of illegal immigration is an infinite problem. And so I said, let's secure the border first. It's 12 years ago. Had we done that, we would not be in the situation we are in today. But we didn't, because we had a president and even some of the people in the field today who advocated for a comprehensive solution. It's not a good idea. We need to take care of enforcing the law today. We need to create this finite problem. We need to secure the border, not just because of people coming across the border illegally, but because of drugs coming across the border, because of sex trafficking and a whole host of other things that are happening on our southern border, including terrorism. So securing the southern border is a national security issue. It's a public health issue with drugs, and it's also an economic issue and security issue. So I would say that once we do that, then the other issue is enforcing our visa laws. Roughly half of the people who are here in this country illegally have overstayed their visa and refuse to go home. And the reason is because I was talking to someone today, actually Rocky Reese on the radio this morning, and he was saying, I know somebody that here is on a visa overstay, and the paperwork was taking forever. They wanted to extend their visa and get into the green card program, and it took forever for the immigration for INS to deal with this, And so the guy got panicked and called him and said, you know what we can do? And they said, oh, don't worry about it. We're not going to enforce it anyway. I mean, that's what they say. We're not enforcing visa overstay, so just go ahead. We'll work it out over time. And he said, well, but now I'm here illegally. I don't want to be here illegally. I want to, process my paper. And they're saying, it doesn't matter. We're not going to send you home. So just stick around. We'll get it processed in due time. This is the laissez-faire attitude that the president has about enforcing the law in this country. We have 40 to 60% of people in this country illegally can and should be sent home because they've overstayed their visa, and the president has told them they don't have to go. We know who they are. We know where they are, and we simply don't do anything about it. So there's a lot of things we can do to enforce the law. We can have an e-verify system that says that unless you're legally in this country, you shouldn't be able to work in this country. You do those things, we can solve the illegal immigration problem pretty quickly. The other issue is, and by the way, almost everybody in the Republican field is for some form of amnesty. You have Rubio and Bush and Huckabee and others who are, for some pathway for people to be able to stay, in some cases citizenship. And then you have folks like Ted Cruz who are not for citizenship, but they're for amnesty for people to be able to stay on a work visa. So they're still able to stay here permanently. They just, in his mind, won't become citizens, but good luck with that. So my feeling is there should not be a path to amnesty. We should enforce the law and allow people into this country who come into this country through a legal process, which is what my father did when he came here. And so that's the second. The final thing is on legal immigration. Again, that's probably the area of the biggest difference, because I believe that we have, over the last 20 years, 35 million people come into this country legally and illegally, more than any 20-year period in American history. Most of those are legal immigrants. We bring in about 1,050,000 a year, which is the highest level ever. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, but the question is who's impacted most by that? Well, 70 to 90% of the people coming in this country are wage earners. So you would say probably wage earners are most impacted. Well, how have wage earners been impacted? You can say, well, the economy's better. Well, maybe the overall economy might be slightly better because you have more people in. That would sort of make sense. But how are the people who are having their jobs being competed with by these workers coming in? And the answer is, wages have basically flatlined over the last 20 years. We've seen, as I mentioned before, we see employment opportunities in many areas of the country where there's a large number of legal and illegal immigrants. The employment opportunities are not there, in fact. So we have an obligation to have a policy on immigration that best suits the American people. And so what I've suggested is that we need to reform the legal immigration system and eliminate two categories of immigrants. And these two categories of immigrants are, to me, very important from two reasons. Number one, direct competition for low-skilled workers. But number two, national security. What we've seen over the last 20 years, actually since 9/11, the number of people coming from high-risk countries, when I say high-risk countries, countries that are high risk of having Islamic terrorists, the number of people coming from those countries since 9/11 has doubled. Now you would think, after 9/11, we would actually do a better job of looking at the people who are coming in from Somalia and Bangladesh and Afghanistan. We're not. We're actually increasing immigration from those areas. And here's the way we're increasing it. This will even confound you more. It's through something called a visa lottery. So we're not screening them. They simply apply, and if they win the lottery, they get into the country. And that's the second, that's 50,000 a year. Second one, and this is what compounds the problem. We have a program called chain migration. It used to be in America, if you came into this country, you could bring your spouse and your minor children. That was the law. In 1990, we changed the law. And now you can bring your spouse, your minor children, your parents, your brothers, your sisters, and their spouses, and your adult children. So here's what happens. This is what I call chain migration. So let's say you let your father in. Well, now your father can bring in his brothers and sisters and their spouses and their children, and the spouse's brothers, sisters, parents, and their children. That's the chain. So by letting one person in as a visa, on a visa that's not screened, you now have a chain of people from this country, and it's exploding. That's why you've seen a doubling of the number of people coming from these high-risk countries. Both these programs should be eliminated. And we should get back to any adult who wants to come into America should come in on their own merit. They shouldn't come in because they happen to have another relative in the country. And by the way, I am the only one who has taken the position on that. Nobody else in the field has taken this position, number one. Number two, there are people in the field who actually want, as I mentioned, Ted Cruz wants to double the number of legal immigrants in America. He also wants to take another category, H-1B visas. H-1B visas are the highly skilled worker visas. STEM workers, science, technology, engineering, math. As you know, a majority of STEM workers in America are not in STEM jobs. They can't find jobs in their profession. Yet we bring over 65,000 every year, mostly computer programmers, who are lower skilled STEM workers to take jobs away from America because they'll work for less. And in fact, two cases highlighted this year, one Disney and one California Edison. Disney actually hired 700 workers to come to America, had American workers train them in computer programming, and then fired the American workforce and replaced them with the H-1B visa holders who would work for 30% less. I want to take that program and get rid of the lowest skill category of H-1Bs and say that we should bring in only higher skill, high-skilled workers. Others in the field, I'll mention Cruz again because he's the most active on this, he wants to increase that number from 65,000 to 330,000. I think that that is a mistake. And that's a big difference between him and me and actually others in the field who want to increase H-1Bs.
I want to thank you for touching on the family being under attack topic there, and I would like to, I'm not quite sure how to ask my question, but extend on it a little bit. And the numbers of the single parent household is increasing obviously due to divorce, and many of the quote deadbeat parents that are under attack there are people who give their all trying to be in their children's life only to just be essentially robbed by the system. And I know Iowa, when you take it into DHS, CPS as well, we've had in July, ruling came down that many of the practices being performed in foster care procedures and adoption procedures are actually unconstitutional, yet nothing has changed. Our service members, we all talk about the suicide rate that is increasing and is far greater than how many casualties of war we've had. But we don't look at the fact that 63% of them are directly involved in a divorce or DHS proceeding. Coming home to an empty house, that is not war that's killing them, it's love killing them. And so I guess my question would be, what are you going to do to address family law reform and the ultimate core root that it is that we can't, how can we educate these people if they have a broken identity and a broken home? And if we can't educate them, they can't be less likely, as you said, to be successful.
The key words you just used was family law reform. And of course, family law reform, there's no federal family law. Family law is a state issue. It's not a federal issue. And so all of the issues you're talking about with respect to visitation and divorce and all of those things are all state law issues. I've heard this question a lot, and I've had people come to me when I was a United States Senator and say, we need to get the federal government involved in this. And my response is, no, we don't. I mean, we just can't. This is not what the federal government should not be involved in divorce, should not be involved in visitation and all those things. These are issues that you're much more likely to be effective in working in your local county, on working in here in the state capitol, and getting reforms of your system here than trying to move the behemoth in Washington, D.C. We don't need to give the federal government another thing to do, not well. And so I do agree that there are problems here in a lot of states that I've heard from, but I don't believe that it's an area for the federal government to get engaged and involved in, other than what I've said before, which is what I would do, which is to try to focus more attention on the importance of family and the importance of marriage, and try to get, President Obama's done an amazing job. I give him credit for this. He's done an amazing job of getting the corporate community, getting the church, getting Hollywood, getting the news media, all to buy into his climate change agenda. I give him a lot of credit for that. I would hope that if we lay out the evidence and do it in a way that I talked about before, and talk about the impact of children, of the breakdown of the family, that we can get all of those institutions to work together and try to put some emphasis on how we can try to reknit the American family. And I think it's possible. I really do. I think it's absolutely possible. And I think it would go a long way to solving the problems that you're talking about.
I would like to ask the last question. You've served in public office since 1991. Times have changed a lot, either by campaigning, how the world has just developed. Looking back to some of your original policy positions, has there been any that have evolved a great deal? I don't want to use the term flip-flop, but as we learn more, we do more. Has there been any that have evolved? But what position also have you just stuck true to?
Well, the other day when I was in Osceola for an event with Chuck Grassley, Grassley introduced me, and at the time when he said it, I thought, well, that's not a very flowery introduction. But the more I thought about it, it was probably one of the nicest things he's ever said about me, at least in my opinion. He got up and sort of stammered a little bit and said, well, let me just say, the best thing I can say about Rick Santorum is I've known him for 20 years, and he hasn't changed a bit. I thought a lot about the positions I had before I took them. And, I think that I always say conservatism is common sense. Conservatism is about what works. People ask me, what's your definition of conservatism? I use Russell Kirk's definition. The stewardship of patrimony. Very fancy, very eloquent. What's that mean? That means we are stewards of an inheritance. And what conservatism is to take that inheritance, to take the things that we know work, that have succeeded, that have created wealth, created a wealthy, not wealth in economic terms, it can't be economic terms, but wealth in a variety of different buckets, if you will. We want to take the principles that have created this rich inheritance and apply them to steward them and apply them to the problems that we confront today. And that's what I've always tried to do as on all the new issues, because there are a lot of new issues that come up. If there's one thing that I regret is during my time in the Senate, we got involved in a lot of issues where like telecommunications and banking reform and insurance, where we just dividing up the pie. I mean, that's what you're just sort of picking one industry over another, or one position, and it's just ugly. And I probably would have taken a step back and said, we need to stop, this government intrusion and trying to pick winners and losers in different sectors of the economy and do something that's much more market-driven. And I'm not too sure at the time that I really had the knowledge and understanding to be able to do something like that. Because it was sort of early in my career that those bills came up, and I just didn't have a handle on a lot of the complexity of the issues in banking and telecommunications policy. So I would say I've become much more a believer that government should be more of a level playing field, free market, and let things. That's why the tax system I put forward gets rid of all the corporate loopholes and taxes, gets rid of all the deductions, gets rid of AMT, gets rid of the estate tax, gets rid of all these things, and just has a very simple, tax. We provide I think right now we're on a $2,800, we're still tinkering with it, $2,800 per person tax credit. So if you're a family of four, you get roughly $11,000 in tax credit, means that's off your tax bill. And it's refundable. So if you don't pay $11,000 in taxes, you actually get a check from the government. So people aren't going to be paying more taxes than they're paying now, but everybody's going to be paying at a lower rate. And not everybody, but most people will be paying at a lower rate, and no one's going to be paying more than they're paying now. And we think that'll be a very exciting pro-growth package, and it doesn't get into picking winners and losers and favoring some industry over another, whether it's on the individual side or on the corporate side. So that's probably something I learned that sort of shaped me as this. And Republicans are as guilty of us as Democrats in sort of playing this corporate game. And I'm not going to do that as president. We're going to try to keep the government hands off those things that we really have no expertise in determining who should win and who should lose. But overall, I always say what works is what works, and the truth is the truth. And in my opinion, in my world, the truth doesn't change. Just because society changes doesn't mean the truth changes. People may not believe the truth anymore, but that doesn't mean it changes. And I think it's always best to stand by the truth, and even when it's not necessarily easy to do. And that's what I'm going to continue to do. And so if you want someone who's, as I said before, who's gone to Washington, D.C., shook things up, made a difference, and isn't going to change, someone you can know, you can trust, because we're not. We're going to stay there, and we're going to fight for the things that made America great and can make America great again. I'd appreciate your support of the caucus. Thank you.
As Joseph comes to the stage, I would like to share a thank you gift with you.